So we're live. Good afternoon, Mark. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, Tudor. Yeah, really good. Busy at the moment, so yes, it's all good.
Good. Keep yourself occupied. Love to hear it. Today we have Mark Terrell joining us. He's going to be running a session today on what makes or how can a good salesperson move in and transition into becoming a good sales manager, because what makes a good salesperson doesn't always make a good sales manager, unfortunately. So people are always merited on their performance and their figures, and they get promoted on that. But often they do, people forget that they need the leadership skills to help them progress and get the best results out of their team. So Mark is going to be spinning the sales leadership jukebox today, aren't you, Mark?
Indeed, yes, indeed. Yes, and you'll understand what that's all about once we kick off.
Excellent stuff. All right, I'll hand it over to you, Mark. Thank you for joining us today.
Great stuff. Thank you, Tudor. So we were talking about the other day about sales people and how they transition to be a good sales manager. So I do a lot of leadership training and coaching. And so I picked out 5 key things that anyone that is going through that transition should be thinking about. And these are key skills you can work on. And rather than just give you the principle, I thought I'd use my music repertoire to highlight what these things are. So let's start on the first one. You'll get the idea. So this is knowing me, knowing you. So if you are going to lead a team, the first thing I suggest you do is understand yourself, understand your behavioral style, and also understand what motivates you. Once you've done that, you'll be in a much better position to lead your team. And then ultimately you'll be at a better position to understand what your team wants from you, ultimately their different behavioral styles and how you can adapt, because ultimately that's what we need to do to get the best from a team, is adapt and understand the 2 different behavioral styles that might be going on and meeting in the middle. And also understanding motivation is very important if you are going to lead a team. So the principle here is to understand yourself before you can lead your team, and it will put you in a far better state when you are in that position rather than winging it as such. So that's number 1. That's the first thing I think you should think about if you are offered that sales management role. Next one is, do you know where you're going to? So this is about setting a vision. And there's 2 visions, actually, I'm just going to suggest you think about. Firstly, your own vision. Where are you going to? Where does this role take you? Understand where that is. And I'm very much a fan of taking responsibility for our own development, understanding how we can develop ourselves and not put the emphasis on the business. So if this is part of your career plan, then think about where it is on that plan. So you know where you're going to and where this role is in that process. Secondly, have a vision for your team. Think about where they're going, where you're taking them. Because if you make that clear, you're more likely to get them to come with you. Because ultimately, we're talking about leadership here. And to lead anyone, and lead any team, they need to know where you're taking them. So be very clear about what that is. What's your vision? What do you see? Where are we today? Where are we going to in the future? And then everything else will then make sense to the team. If you've made it clear, set it out clearly for them to understand, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, and also why we're doing it. And that goes back again to understanding yourself. You can understand what others want from you, and you can actually have more of a why around what you're doing rather than just going through the motions and doing the what and the how. It's really important to understand why you're doing something. So do you know where you're going to? That's number 2. Next one is tell them what you want, what you really, really, really want. And that's what the Spice Girls can teach us about leadership. Now, it sort of follows on from do you know where you're going to, but also more importantly, we tend to be quite vague in most instances. We're not very clear about what we want outcome-wise. So I tend to talk about this in a domestic situation because most people get it and they understand the difference. If you have children, you'll understand this, but I think even if you haven't, you'll understand exactly what I'm saying here. If you tell your children to go and tidy their bedrooms up, then they will tidy the bedroom up in their way. That's what will happen. And when you go and inspect it, won't be what you're actually exactly what you're expecting and what you want. So when we say tell them what you want, what you really, really, really want, tell them specifically what you're looking to happen and in what way. So going back to the domestic tidying up your bedroom scenario, if you tell your children, tidy your bedroom up, and that means make your bed, put your clothes in the wash or in the wardrobe, vacuum the floor, and whatever else that you feel is part of that process. So you're more likely then to get the outcome or the thing completed the way you want it to be completed. That's the key. So when you're leading a team, be very specific and explicit in what you actually want and also how you want it to be done, and be clear on that, and then make sure that you check and make sure that it's done that way, so that when you checked, then you've made sure that it's done that way, and you're more likely to get it done that way again. So is this all making sense, Tudor?
It certainly does, yeah. No,
Good.
I'm slightly concerned about your musical taste, but in terms of the content, it's fantastic, yeah.
Good. Okay.
So is it important that we have these albums in our repertoire as well?
Absolutely essential. And this obviously at the end of this short little talk, with obviously you need to add them all to your Spotify collection, which I'm sure you'll be doing.
Yeah, maybe we could have a session of just listening to these tunes. But no, it's all
Indeed.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So let's move on then. So the next thing is to think about is the right thing. Now, again, this follows on from the last one. So you told them what you want and how you want it done. The one thing that you need to do, and what this is mentioning and highlighting, is you've got to catch them doing the right thing. So when they do the right thing, you have to notice, you've got to tell them that you noticed, and then you've got to actually tell them what difference it's made. And then you are more likely to get more of that behavior. So again, going back to the scenario at home and the domestic situation, trying to get kids to tidy their bedroom up, make sure you notice when they do it right, make sure you tell them the difference it's made. So in other words, it's made me really happy. It's nice to come home and find things are tidy, blah, blah, blah. And in the same, when you're at work, you set a task, make sure you notice when it's been done right. We as human beings are great at catching people doing things wrong. We do it without even thinking, don't we? Most of the time, we can notice when something's wrong. But how many times do we notice when people do things right? That's the key, and that will set you apart more than anything else. If you can do that consciously and catch people doing things right 3 or 4 more times than wrong, then you will be noticed. People will notice that you are noticing them, and that makes people feel good. And one of the things that I do a lot of work around motivation, and people like feedback. That's the one thing that makes them feel good, especially if they feel that they've done something that's worthwhile, and you've noticed. It doubles that feeling, that could feel good factor. And again, going back to the last thing, you're more likely to get more of that behavior if you catch them doing it right. And this is particularly important when at the beginning of that visioning stage. Go back to the first thing when you talk about, or the second thing when we talk about having a vision, where are you going? Once you start that process of this is where we're going, then it's really important to make sure that in those early stages, that the good behaviors that you're looking for, you notice, and make sure that you tell your team that you've noticed, and then they will know that that is the right behavior, that's what you're looking for, and you're more likely to get more of it. Okay, and then the final one, which is something that people overlook, I think. This is Nick Lowe, cruel to be kind, but in the right measures, that's the key thing. So what I'm referring to here is that we are, as human beings, and when we come to a management role, we tend to be either overly supportive or overly challenging. Now, if we're overly supportive, what happens is that we create a team which is dependent on us. They always come to us, and you don't feel as if you can basically leave them alone because everything comes back on you. They are ultimately dependent on you because you're supporting them overly supportive. The opposite to that is overly challenging. So you're putting them in a stress state. They don't feel as if you're there to support them. They feel that everything's in a very challenging situation, and they probably feel as if things, when they go wrong, you'll catch them doing things wrong but not right. So it's a very stressful place to be. So those are the two different ends of the scale. But what we want is we need to be balanced. So you need to be cruel to be kind, but in the right measures. It means that we need to be equally supportive and challenging. So if you remember that, think about, am I overly supportive or challenging? Because we are naturally one or the other. And think about, well, what do I need to increase and what do I need to reduce? So I get to that point where it's equally support and challenge. So we can, again, think about this in a parental sort of way. If we are overly supportive as a parent, we don't allow our children to develop. They feel as if, well, like almost like a cocoon around them, and we protect them, but we don't allow them to grow, and we don't challenge them. Ultimately, if we challenge them too much, they become stressed, and they won't really you won't get the best out of them. Short term, you might get better performance, but ultimately long term they will be in a stress state. So we need to think about being equal measures, challenge and support. That's one of the key things to always remember when you're moving from that sales role, and ultimately these sales managers roles tend to be given to the people that are good at sales, and they're given a sales manager's role. If you want to maintain some sales responsibility, these are the 5 things to remember. So just to recap, firstly, think about, understand yourself, understand what your behavior style is and what motivates you ultimately. Secondly, make sure you know where you're going, yourself and your team, and make sure your team knows where you're going. Tell them what you want, what you really, really, really want. So be explicit and clear about behaviors and things that you want to happen, and make sure that is really clearly set out. Then make sure you catch people doing things right, and make sure you catch them doing things right 3 or 4 times more often than you catch them doing things wrong. And then ultimately make sure that you are balanced in your support and your challenge with your team. So you've got that sweet spot of challenge and support. So those are the 5 things that I think you should take on board if you're given the opportunity to leap from sales into a sales manager's role, because ultimately the sales manager's role is more about people management than sales management.
That's really interesting. I think because being a sales leader is such a broad role, isn't it, to say the least? And I think you've kind of pinpointed the 5 big priorities there, haven't you? The 5 main points. But
ultimately we've got to remember what the team wants from us. That's the thing to remember. What do they need from us? And those 5 things are the key things that the team will want. And if you get them right, you will make your life a lot easier.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic actually, because you see it all the time in companies, and it's an age-old kind of pain point, isn't it? Because you see
Mm.
Top performer, it's difficult for the senior manager. You see a top performer doing really well, and you want to promote or encourage that person and reciprocate and put them into a sales leadership role. But being a sales leader is a completely different role to being an actual.
Well, the two things go on, don't they? Firstly, it's almost like it's a natural progression. People are expected that they've probably been sales for a long time, so the sales manager role comes along, and they've been there the longest and they're best at that role, so they're almost deserving of it.
Yeah.
But the thing to remember is that a lot of people will not be firstly prepared, and secondly, it might not be their skill set, as we mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah.
Is that if it's not your skill set, it's not something that motivates you. It might be actually the wrong actual job for you. So be very wary of making sure that those key motivations that you get from your sales role can still be maintained and fulfilled in that management role.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I think often as well, a lot of companies, they don't have the time or the resources, or they maybe delay it a bit to give them real quality leadership training, and they kind of and in some cases you can understand why, but they think this person would be a great leader for whatever reason, and from the persona they give off, but there's a lot more science to it than that. There's a little bit.
Yeah, from my experience, a lot of people, when they get that role given to them, they're given the outcomes like this is what we want sales wise, but they're not given an awful lot of training as to how you get that result from other people.
Yeah.
And just because you're good at something doesn't necessarily mean you're good at training somebody else to do it.
Yeah, no, that's all useful tips. I could talk about that all day, actually. But yeah, really interesting, Mark. Thank you very much for that. That's really useful.
That's all right.
And for anyone watching, if they want to get in touch with Mark, we'll put your link below, the Reluctant Leader Academy. You're available on LinkedIn, I would imagine. And what's your website address, Mark?
It's the reluctantleader.academy.
Academy. Brilliant. All right.
Yeah.
So we'll put the link below in the comments on our YouTube channel when we've done that. And any questions, do not hesitate to get in contact with me or Mark. But thanks, Mark, and it's been great working with you, and you've always got some really useful things to teach us. So thanks for that. I appreciate that. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Tudor. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot.